is a WMUR Commitment 2024 special, a pivotal primary.
New Hampshire, with General Eisenhower as a presidential candidate, is the arena for the most hotly contested primary in the state's history.
What we start here in New Hampshire today, I believe, must succeed next summer and next November.
I remember when we couldn't find a microphone.
This is the first, and it sure is the best.
You listen, and you judge, and you decide, and then you do what's right, and I'll never forget it.
New Hampshire tonight has made Bill Clinton the comeback kid.
I intend to win New Hampshire.
Let's take back America. God bless you, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire has a long history of picking presidential nominees.
Granite Staters put the candidates through their paces as they fight for the nomination.
I am paying for this microphone, Mr.
Demanding constant access.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can do that because I got to do an interview with WMUR. Do you watch WMUR? Absolutely.
And honing their campaigns to the very end.
Tonight, we sure showed them what a comeback looks like.
But the 2024 campaign cycle is playing out amid serious questions that could reshape American politics.
Welcome back. 2024 is a pivotal primary for both major parties and an opportunity for third parties offering voters an alternative.
Some of the questions looming over this election are who gets to decide who's first in the nation and what do voters really want from their elected leaders?
Many Americans also wondering how we can find common ground in such divided times. And in New Hampshire, one of the biggest questions of the 2024 primary is, will Governor Chris Sununu run for president?
For the last few months, Sununu has been a regular presence on national political shows and has even played the role of pundit himself, saying that if the primary were held today, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida would win. It's an odd take for anyone who wants to be viewed as a serious White House contender themselves, but in this case, as it is in many others, Chris Sununu is doing his own thing. He's a member of a New Hampshire political dynasty, but Governor Chris Sununu quickly set himself apart when he improv'd his first inaugural address.
We are here about today and going forward.
A governor with serious responsibilities who doesn't always take himself so seriously. This familiar style through politics and a pandemic earned him a broad base of Granite State support. And while the Sununu name is affiliated with service in Washington, from the beginning, he rejected the idea of climbing the ladder to D.C.
Is governor the highest office you're going to run for?
I don't anticipate running for another office ever again, to be honest. I have no interest in ever going to Washington, whether it's Congress, Senate. I don't have the tolerance for that.
That focus on the 603, as the governor often calls New Hampshire, paid dividends with voters, as did an approach to President Donald Trump that was more measured and less reflexively partisan than many other Republicans. Even though one Trump visit saw the governor briefly locked out of the presidential motorcade, there was already a sense in the air on election night 2018 of what Sununu's future might hold.
I think eventually you might see Chris Sununu trying to move on to higher office.
It'll be interesting to see what his trajectory is here. Maybe he's going to aim higher than the U.S. Senate.
Maybe we can, in the future, say you heard it here first.
Sununu did take a pass on the U.S. Senate, reportedly irking some Washington Republicans who felt the governor took full advantage of their political courtship only to leave them at the altar. Although anonymous, that criticism echoed the sentiments of some conservatives back home who've previously knocked Sununu's State House leadership style as swinging between too disengaged and too self-involved.
He's very busy, too busy for little people like me.
There's another bigger issue if Sununu runs. He would face a steep path to victory as he is not aligned with the Republican Party platform on the issue of abortion.
I'm a pro-choice governor, and as long as I'm governor, we're going to remain a pro-choice state. Legislature wants to put a bill on my desk codifying Roe v. Wade. I'd sign it in a second.
While recent polling shows most Granite State Republicans would prefer Sununu not run for president, the question keeps getting asked. The governor recently indicated what he'd really like to do is get on the stage for a presidential debate.
I'll make some sort of firm decision sometime in the summer. I would love to debate. I would love to get on a debate stage with Donald Trump and DeSantis and the whole gang.
Sununu has alternately said he'll play the role of referee in the first in the nation primary. And if he doesn't run, his endorsement here could be a difference maker in 2024.
As Sununu considers his decision, there's already a lot of activity among other Republicans with their eyes on the White House. There are those testing the water on the GOP side, but not a lot of candidates have officially thrown their hats into the ring.
Keep going whatever you're doing. I have a vision of what it means to be American today. It involves the basic principles and ideals that are the backbone of this campaign and a detailed policy vision to go with it.
At 37, Vivek Ramaswamy is the youngest candidate in the GOP field. The political newcomer launched his bid for president in February, with stops here in New Hampshire, where he decried wokeism and called for an agenda to end affirmative action, saying the American system should reward ability over all else.
I think affirmative action has become a national cancer that teaches us to view each other on the basis of our skin color.
Forbes lists the biotech entrepreneur's net worth at more than $500 million, money that could give him a competitive advantage to break through in a crowded field. Though Ramaswamy says he's committed to the retail politics the First in the Nation primary is known for.
The people who met me today, they're going to see something different, and I see something different than we do talking to each other through a TV screen.
All in on the New Hampshire primary as a campaign feature, presidential candidate Steve Laffey, who says he's moved himself and his family to the Granite State for months to raise his profile in the GOP primary race.
We thought the Kennedys campaigned hard in the 60s. Every single person in New Hampshire will meet my family.
The former mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island, population 82,566. Laffey says he aims to pull off the same kind of fiscal turnaround in Washington that he engineered at City Hall. That vision includes an overhaul of Social Security and a callback to fiscal conservative policies not seen in a century.
And we're going to break through right here, right in New England, where I'm from.
Laffey says he's running as a populist conservative Republican who thinks the next president needs to be more willing to stand up to China. Also running an outsider campaign is former Montana Secretary of State Corey Stapleton.
We have a great country, but we have a lot of things that we can do better, and I'm running for president because of that.
Stapleton says he wants to shrink the size of the federal government, return power to the states, and try to unite the country.
Peace is something that you get through strength, not through isolationism. So whether at the international level, as a former naval officer, or here domestically, fiscally, we need to get our ducks in a row.
Now officially in the race as well, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Hutchinson has been calling for alternatives to former President Trump running in 2024, saying the GOP shouldn't be led by, quote, arrogance and revenge, calling for a return to what he describes as the principles of the Republican Party.
We need leaders who are problem solvers and not simply chaos creators.
And now, as one of only a handful of declared candidates on the GOP side, he says to expect to see him a lot in the First in the Nation primary state.
You're going to see me in New Hampshire. I'm going to be testing the waters here. I've had a very good response.
The 72-year-old served 8 years as Arkansas governor and was term limited to run again. He says his brand of republicanism is about restrained government and individual liberty. And then there are the potential candidates on the Republican side. A lot of them, at varying levels of testing the proverbial waters, some seeing what the temperature is like, others have teams and are just waiting for their moments to dive in. Many of them are current or former governors.
And I can promise you this, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been hinting at a run for months, laying the groundwork in his home state of Florida with an agenda aimed at the culture wars, emboldened by a re-election victory of almost 20 points over his Democratic opponent. The former congressman and naval lawyer has signaled his desire to sign legislation to prohibit most abortions after the 6-week mark, remove restrictions on carrying a gun in public, and signed a law that prohibits instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in schools until 3rd grade.
We need to make sure that our education system is bringing us together.
In recent Granite State polls, DeSantis has either been first or second, fighting for the early top spot with former President Donald Trump. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott has also been seen as a potential candidate, traveling to early states like Iowa, pitching a new American sunrise and calling for unity in a time of divisiveness. Scott, whose 2013 election made him the first black Southern senator in more than a century, became a leading voice on criminal justice reforms in the wake of the George Floyd killing, working on bipartisan legislation that so far is still stalled.
Politics too often gets in the way of doing what every American knows is common sense.
If they're going to get into a primary fight with Donald Trump, they better be ready, because it will not be tiddlywinks.
Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is once again hinting at a presidential run. In 2016, Christie spent much of his campaign on the ground in New Hampshire, banking on the state to propel his chances at the nomination. Christie has been increasingly outspoken against former President Donald Trump, who he says crossed a red line with unproven claims of election fraud in 2020. He's also been critical of President Biden's stance toward Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Does anybody in this room look at President Biden and go, oh, don't mess with him?
Our nation's future rests in Virginia's present. All eyes are on Virginia.
Virginia's first-term Governor Glenn Youngkin also not ruling out a run. Youngkin made headlines in 2021, becoming the first Republican in more than a decade to be elected governor in Virginia, a state where just a year earlier, Joe Biden won by 10 points. The former investment firm CEO pitching himself in that race as a businessman and political outsider.
We can build a new day.
Focusing his first-term agenda on education after COVID shutdowns and fights over parental rights, plus the economy, slashing both the corporate tax rate and the rate for Virginia's top earners. Miami's mayor, Francis Suarez, also contemplating getting into the presidential race. Suarez embarking on a 10-city tour across the country with a focus on crime, pointing to his city, Miami, recording one of the lowest homicide rates in its history. The popular 45-year-old mayor has called for a young, conservative visionary to be in the White House. Former Texas Congressman Will Hurd has traveled to the Granite State several times as he considers a run.
It's just unacceptable to me.
The former clandestine CIA agent has said the U.S. needs to wake up to the fact that it's in a new Cold War with China. A vocal critic of former President Donald Trump, Hurd has also called for a lowering of the political temperature, saying he's tired of being told to hate my neighbor because we disagree.
We need to be able to have someone that can actually get independents and Democrats to vote in a general election. So candidate quality matters.
Also considering a run is former Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers. He served as the chair of the powerful House Intelligence Committee and would bring considerable foreign policy experience to the race. Rogers says if he gets in, he'd run a more civil, solutions-oriented campaign.
New Hampshire Democrats are at odds with their national party over the first-in-the-nation primary. When we come back, what that means for this primary and how the state Republican Party is helping to make it a success and look ahead to 2028.